This is the Sober Boozers Club podcast.
Welcome everybody to the Sober Boozers Club podcast. My name is Ben Gibbs. I'm an alcoholic and I've been sober since January 2022. In that time, I have been navigating the world of alcohol-free beers, sampling some of the best that the world has to offer. In this podcast, we're going to talk to people from within these circles and find out a little bit about their journey. So you sit back, relax, and enjoy. In today's episode, I am talking to Richard Casement, who is the founder of Clean Break. Now, for a little while, Clean Break had an alcohol-free beer on the market, and it was actually quite good, which is what first turned my head into his direction, if you like. They've since transitioned, and they're doing something a little bit different, so I thought it would be a good idea to have a good old chat about it. How are you, my friend? Are you well?
I'm well. There's this big yellow thing, if you can see it over my shoulder, kind of coming through.
I've got a bit of that
in
as
the
well.
sky.
Although I'm looking outside, and there's an ominous grey, even, cloud of doom approaching me. So, but what a lovely morning it's been.
It's been nice, yeah. And we've had one of those days. I mean, you don't have kids, so this doesn't apply to yourself, but it's one of those days where you get to the end of half term and it's like, right, okay, back to normal now. And then you realise that they've got, an inverted commas, a training day at school and the kids are still off today.
Oh, no. I mean, it's nice that it's been sunny, but also, oh, God.
Yeah.
Yeah, I haven't even thought about how annoying training days must be for parents. I just remember them being wonderful for me as a child.
You have to use the best, the strongest reframe mindset that you can. Because otherwise you could end up like you just really getting on top of you. And it just is what it is, you can't control it. And luckily, I'm really grateful that both myself and my wife have a degree of flexibility in our working lives now. So she's just kind of binned off a meeting this afternoon and taken the rest of the day off and taken the kids to the park. And I sort of had them this morning. So, yeah.
And now you're here to chat nonsense with me.
Yeah, good. I love it.
It's a very important commitment that you couldn't possibly get out of.
Absolutely. Yeah, the most important commitment of the day.
Well, I'm honoured. We are, of course, here to talk about Clean Break. Clean Break has been through many facets in its time. Talk to me about how it all started for you. When did you decide to set up Clean Break and what is it about?
Yeah, so it's probably worth kind of going back in history a little while to sort of give a bit of the listener a bit of an understanding of, my past. And I think, talking about what Clean Break is now and what it means to me and what I'm doing and why I'm doing it, I think it's relevant to bring that part of the story into it as well. So for over 20 years, I spent pretty much all of my working adult life working in the drinks industry in some way, shape or form. So initially managing bars and restaurants, loved being in service of others, loved the buzz, loved the energy, and ultimately you kind of had the opportunity to do your hobby as a job, kind of being around people, getting drunk, get paid for it, and then also get drunk at the end of the night as well. So, so that was the first part of it. And then I went into sort of sales roles when I was about 28, sort of firstly a bit of recruitment for bars and restaurants, and then into sort of sales roles working with drinks brands, alcohol brands. And I did that really for best part of about 10 years, really. And then obviously COVID hit. Funnily enough, I'd literally, just as COVID hit, I'd just started what was ultimately my dream job with working with an agency that had lots of spirits brands that I'd worked with as a bartender. And, I'd kind of admired and sort of got headhunted to go and join them and set up their national account division. So for me, it was like, wow, this is kind of like I've achieved my dream almost at the time. And then COVID hit. And I think like for a lot of people, COVID ended up, now I can look back and realize it was a period where I, probably not knowingly, but I was mentally and physically really starting to question my relationship with alcohol, not from a sort of an addiction or a dependency perspective, but just from how much value it was bringing to my life. Was it really serving me in the same way as it had done through my 20s and 30s? And, we had young kids, young family. And I think ultimately deep down inside, I knew it probably wasn't. But then obviously when went back to work, started to go back to work during COVID and the on-trade came back alive, sort of stop start, that kind of thing, and trying to really sort of pick up the pieces a little bit and get back into it. And I found it really hard to do that. And I couldn't pinpoint what it was. And I knew something wasn't quite right. but I didn't know what it was. And then it was sort of summer of 2021 when the on-trade fully reopened, pubs and bars fully reopened, and we sort of knew it was going to be for good. There wasn't going to be any more lockdowns, because otherwise it would have been pretty catastrophic for the industry. And I just simply couldn't get back into it. I had lost what I felt like was my inspiration, was my mojo, my motivation for it. And I couldn't understand why, because it's what I'd done for 20 years. I was like, this feels really weird. This feels really uncomfortable. And I started to sort of spiral into a bit of depression, really, ultimately, really poor mental health, really questioning myself, my worth within the job, within the career. And then ultimately found myself at my kitchen table questioning my worth on this planet as well, which is quite a worrying thing for someone who's generally been quite upbeat and positive in life. So kind of knew I needed to do something about that. Got to the end of the year, and although I didn't think alcohol was the root cause of the problems, I sort of had a pretty good idea it wasn't going to be helping the situation from a mental health perspective. So I decided to take a break, and initially it was a 6-month break from drinking, and I'd signed up to a half Iron distance triathlon in the summer of 2022, and that was my reason, that was my excuse, because you've got to have an excuse, haven't you? Where you
can't just do it for the sake of it. That'd be ridiculous, right?
No, why would anyone choose not to drink alcohol? I mean,
I still don't understand that.
Yeah.
3 years in, I still don't understand why anyone would choose to do it. Like, if they don't have to.
Choose not to drink it. Yeah, well, like for me, it got to the point where it's like, I'm not sure I'm enjoying this anymore. I think in many ways I'd sort of I feel like I'd completed alcohol. If alcohol was like, a Nintendo 64 game, if it was like Super Mario Brothers, I think I'd completed it. I'd killed Bowser. I'd gone through all of the cheat codes and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Because it was not just my identity outside of work. It was my identity in work as well. And it played such a big part of my life for so many years. I think deep down inside, I wanted something different. I wanted change, but I didn't really appreciate it at the time. And then, started taking that break, obviously started to reap the benefits, certainly physically and mentally as well, within, a few months. I started working with coaches myself who were supporting me in terms of kind of helping me work on my mindset. I tried therapy in the past and never really felt it was something that I kind of got on with for whatever reason. Whereas my coaches were able to help me look at, more towards, what was the future, what were my strengths? What was I good at? What could I draw on to help me step forward into growth in my life? Rather than reflecting on the past and the things that I was, ashamed of or felt guilty of, or, whatever it was. So that really helped cement that alcohol-free choice. And then the event came in the middle of 2022, and I did that, completed it. And, kind of at that point, it probably should have been like, all right, are you ready to have a drink? And I think all my mates were like, well, are you going to start drinking again now? And I was like, well, I don't see why I would. Like, feel great. I don't really I don't really feel like I want or need to have a drink. I'm physically fitter than I've been in God knows how many years. Mentally, I feel really, really on the ball. The only challenge I had was that I still worked in this job, which was selling alcohol. So I kind of a bit of a dilemma of fairly gargantuan proportions. And sort of had to sort of decide, what was I going to put first? Was I going to put my mental health first, or was I going to put this fairly successful, well-paid career first? And I chose the former. I chose to sort of support my own mental health and well-being, because I think I'd got to a point where I realised that I probably hadn't been doing that for many years. I hadn't been putting my mental health, my overall well-being first, and I'd been, sort of sacrificing that for in the chase of pleasure, really, more than anything else. And sort of short-term pleasurable experiences, those quick dopamine fixes. So made that decision to move away from that career. I knew I didn't know what I wanted to do at the time. This is the thing, I didn't have a clue, because it's all I'd done for 20 years, and I dropped out of uni twice. So it wasn't like I had like a sort of a really fancy degree that I could lean back on and go back to. It was like, this is all I'd ever known. And although I didn't know what I wanted to do, I knew what I didn't want to do, and it was sell booze anymore. It just didn't align with my values. So anyway, I ended up coming across a job, which was a bit of a segue out of what I was doing. It was still working with hospitality operators, so some of the contacts and relationships that I'd established, but selling a different product, not alcohol. And so I thought, well, do you know what? That's quite a nice segue. The product wasn't particularly anything that I was interested in. It was security staff, so door staff, basically.
Okay.
So working for the UK's biggest security staff provider to the hospitality industry. And it was based in Leeds where I lived, really nice people. They really bought into me. I bought into them and thought, yeah, do you know what? This is a great opportunity, well paid. So I took that opportunity. And going back to where Clean Break started, it started in the car with my wife and my kids on my way. I can't remember where we were going. I think we were going for a walk somewhere perhaps. But it was in the period of my notice period between when I'd handed in my notice at my previous job and before I went to join the security company. I remember sitting in the car with my wife and I was thinking about mulling over what I'd done, my change, my decision to change, what it meant, what I was walking away from 20 years of a career all invested, and what that, all the kind of, the fears and doubts and everything like that was going in my head. And I remember looking at my wife and thinking, and said to her, I'm going to write a book. And she sort of went, all right. She sort of looked at me and was like, okay, right, all right. Let's hear what that's all about. So I said, yeah, I'm going to write a book. It's going to be called Clean Break, my inverted commas messy divorce from alcohol. Because I thought actually it represents what Clean Break represents is making a clean break away from things that are no longer serving you, or taking a clean break away from things that are no longer serving you in your life, whether that's alcohol, whether it's drugs, whether it's lifestyle, whether it's environment, whether it's social circles, whether it's a career, whether it's a relationship, whether it's, limiting beliefs or whatever it might be, a particular mindset. I thought, yeah, there's something in that. I'm going to do that. Anyway, that idea kind of quickly got rationalized in my head and realized that it probably wasn't a sort of a long-term career opportunity or something that was going to make me any money, and so put that on the back burner. But the idea of Clean Break, I couldn't get rid of that. That just really resonated with me. There was something in it. So I went to, when I first started working at the security company, I went back to working with my coaches and I went away on a long weekend with them, like a men's retreat, kind of health and wellbeing retreat with everything from meditation, yoga, cold water immersion, breath work, all this kind of stuff. But we also spent some time working a lot on limiting beliefs and kind of goals and what we wanted to achieve in life and things that are maybe holding us back. And something that came up for me in that process was that I'd always wanted to start my own business. I'd always aspired to work for myself, to have my own, to be able to be in charge of my own kind of destiny and have that flexibility for lifestyle around, kids and things like that. And that sort of came out of it. And then I sort of come back to this idea of Clean Break. And I was like, well, maybe Clean Break's the thing that gives me this opportunity to start a business. And then what does that look like? How can I realize that? How can I bring that to life? And actually I sort of put two and two together and realized that my 20 years of experience in the drinks industry and with the category itself, alcohol-free drinks category booming, I thought, well, actually, maybe there's something in this. Maybe this is the opportunity. Maybe this is the sort of the ikigai, if you like, all of those things coming together. Something you're good at, something that can make you money, something you enjoy, and something the world needs. Sort of all these things coming together. I was like, yeah, well, that's it. So that's essentially where Clean Break was formed, if you like. The concept of it, the idea for it. And then, as they say, the rest is sort of history.
It's a big decision to make, like coming out of that career with a family, as you say, and kind of nothing initially to fall back on, but the seed that was planted of, I want to do something that works for me. And I think, especially if, I don't know if you would classify yourself as an alcoholic, because of course alcoholism comes in many forms, You can have a bad relationship with alcohol without being an alcoholic. It's something that kind of resonated with me there was when you were saying, like, it was just a 6-month break, but then afterwards you say, why would I go back to this? Once you kind of break that relationship with alcohol, you do kind of start to question it. Like I've known so many people that have only intended to take like 2 months, 3 months off, and they're still not drinking today, and this is years down the line. I think everyone's relationship with alcohol is a very individual one, which is quite interesting, really, because I know when I stopped drinking, I kind of viewed alcoholism as a one-size-fits-all sort of thing. Like you'd think of an alcoholic or you'd think of somebody with a negative relationship with alcohol, and it would very much be like the stigma would enter your brain, like, oh, brown paper bag, usually an older kind of scruffy man.
Yeah.
It's not like that at all, is it? Have you found, like, since you've started with Clean Break, that you're working with people that are maybe sober curious, people that drink regularly but just want to address their relationship with alcohol a little bit?
Yeah, definitely. Absolutely. I think it is becoming much more accessible now. I think, what we talked about at the start, this idea of, choosing, actually making the choice as a positive lifestyle choice, not defined by, dependency or addiction or anything like that, because we've all got compulsions in our lives. We all have things that we are somewhat compulsive towards and dependent or the real sharp end of the spectrum addicted to, whether it's doom scrolling, social media, pornography, chocolate, sugar, whatever it might be. That we've all got these kind of compulsions in our lives. And I think it used to be the case that, and it wasn't that long ago really when I think this started to change, probably 5 or 6 years ago perhaps, but it used to be the case that you were either an alcoholic or you weren't. And if you weren't an alcoholic, then what's the problem? Just crack on. But I think the reality is very different. We're all on this sort of spectrum, with all of those things, not just with alcohol, we're on that spectrum. And I think at one end, you've got sort of total abstinence, sobriety, whatever you want to call it. Then you've got kind of compulsive tendencies. Then you've got the sort of dependence, and then the sort of the addiction at the sort of the sharp end of the spectrum, I think. So I think we recognize that there is a spectrum now that comes into it. And I think when we can show and highlight that to people, it opens the conversation up. That it shows that there's much more nuance to it. One of the things that frustrates me at the moment is this lack of nuance in so much in life. That so many people look for, extremes. It's this sort of black and white thinking, kind of, it's either good or bad, up or down, high or low, red or black, red or blue, black or white. This kind of real black or white thinking where, you either it either has to be one thing or the other. And there's just so much more nuance to life in general. And I think people's relationship with alcohol sits in that category. Yes, of course, addiction's terrible, and it is driven primarily by this substance that we are actively promoting and marketing to people, which is highly addictive and neurotoxin essentially, and it has the potential to ruin lives and at the extreme end, take lives. So it's really bad. But actually I think the 60, 70%, 75, 80% even of society, especially in our sort of Western society, sits somewhere in that middle bit, and where do people sit there if they don't want to sort of label themselves as addicts or alcoholics, and they're perhaps not striving for total abstinence, or the idea of never drinking again is a really difficult thing for them to sort of comprehend. Where does that leave people in that middle space? And I think that's where I sort of found and still do find myself. I've never said I'm never drinking again. I've always taken the sort of the approach that I know I'm not drinking today, 100% guarantee I'm not drinking today, and I'm pretty sure as hell I'm not going to drink tomorrow. Beyond that, what will be, and it's impossible to predict the future, but all we can do is look to create the future. But we do that in the here and now, and that's living in this moment. And I think in terms of my own relationship, no, I never really sort of class myself as addicted or an alcoholic. I think there's dependency in there, but more, my identity was dependent on alcohol given the job I did. And I think that then came with some emotional dependency. But I think when you work in the drinks industry, if you have a problem with alcohol, that's a really big issue, because you are literally, it's like they say about drug dealers, don't get high on your own supply.
Yeah,
I think it's one of the things that drug dealers would often say. And I think that's the case with people who work in the alcohol industry. I think that there's almost this recognition that there needs to be a degree of sort of barriers or a sort of a self-imposed safety mechanism in there somewhere. And although there was, a high occurrence of, nights out entertaining customers and going on trips to vineyards and breweries and distilleries and all that kind of thing, where, we imbibe more than probably is recommended, I never really felt like the alcohol was the problem. I think I look back now and 100% appreciate that it was causing it. Not that it was causing me problems. It was at times causing me problems, not towards the end of my drinking. It was more that the alcohol was one of the things that was probably the main thing that was preventing me actually deal with my other problems, the underlying problems that I had, which was, the mental health and the depression and the anxiety and all of that kind of stuff. So I think that's kind of where I sort of sit on the on my views of it. I heard a great podcast the other day. Mark Manson,
yes,
author of The Subtle Art of Not Giving a Fuck. He was on Rich Roll's podcast, if you know Rich Roll, bit of a hero of mine, and they were talking about his journey of sobriety, because Rich Roll, big advocate for AA and that kind of that approach to things, and Mark Manson, it was at the time of recording, was about 2 years alcohol free, and they were chatting about it, and he said something which really resonated with me. He said, I never thought of myself as an alcoholic, or I never thought of my drinking as a problem when I was drinking. It's only since I've stopped drinking, made the decision to stop drinking, and the longer that's gone on, the more I reflect back on it and think about it as a problem, or think about it as problematic. And I think that's so true. That there's a phrase that a good friend of mine uses, which is, when you're in the jam jar, you can't read the label. And
Nice.
it's not until you get yourself out of that jam jar
Yeah.
and you're outside and you can actually read what's going on inside it.
I think for me, it was very similar. It was so easy for me when I was going through it to blame alcohol, because I got branded an alcoholic maybe 6 months to a year before I stopped drinking. It had always been something that I was kind of dancing with, and I'd refer to myself as an alcoholic and kind of pretend that I was trying to moderate, but obviously I wasn't. And something that came up in conversation was that the alcohol isn't the cause of your issues here. The alcohol isn't causing all of these problems, but the alcohol is a lubricant to these behaviors that display themselves. Because until you cut the alcohol out, you can't start to address what's going on wrong with your life. Because you can probably be the happiest person in the world and have a drink and be relatively okay. But none of us really are that content, really. Everyone comes with their own baggage, don't they? And the alcohol really does lubricate those issues, and it allows those to kind of fester.
It's so funny. It's like I do strongly believe that there are people that can moderate and drink alcohol in moderation. Like my wife's a moderator; she has absolutely no problem with drinking. It's never really affected her from a mental perspective. She deals with hangovers. The odd hangover she has pretty well. So I believe that there are people that can have a, inverted commas, healthy relationship with alcohol, despite we know that there is no health benefits to consumption at any level of alcohol. And I'm never one for sort of promoting prohibition and that kind of thing. I think we all make our own decisions in life, and that's the great thing about living in a diplomatic society, that we all get those choices of how we live our lives. But yeah, I think it's certainly, I always used to find it hilarious now I find it hilarious that people say, and I used to say this, I used to think this because it was a story and a narrative that had been perpetuated around alcohol. One of the many stories and narratives, let's face it, that's perpetuated around alcohol. And that's that you show your true colours when you've had a drink. You show your true self when you've had a drink. And because the alcohol, makes you say the things that underlie you believe in your head. And I think that's absolute bullshit. I think when you stop drinking alcohol and you remove alcohol from yourself, you show your true self, because it creates the space and the void for the feelings, the emotions, the beliefs, the values that you have deep inside you, intrinsically within you, that you perhaps were suppressing before and you didn't really appreciate and realize. It gives those things an opportunity and a space to exist and come up to the surface without being suppressed. So I think actually what happens is, when you stop drinking, you remove alcohol, your true self comes out, and who you truly are comes out. And I think that's sometimes what stops people from continuing the alcohol-free journey, because that can feel quite uncomfortable, because it's almost like this recognition that, the person that I thought I was and the behaviors that I was putting outwardly and the beliefs are actually not who I am. And I'm not sure I really want that vulnerability, that level of vulnerability or sensitivity or emotional awareness or whatever it might be. I'm not sure I really want that. So I'll go, I think maybe I'll go back to my old ways and use the crutch of alcohol to suppress that. But actually I think that, when you drink alcohol, it turns you into someone that you're not. It doesn't turn you into the true version of yourself. It turns you into someone you're not, and you end up saying things that you don't mean and you don't believe and you don't want to say. You don't want to act in a certain way, and you do things that you don't want to do. You end up ringing the dealer and getting a bag of gear into, inverted commas, sober up at 2:00 in the morning, that kind of stuff. For me, it's the other way around.
Yeah, I absolutely have found that. Like, I'd wake up and think, I don't feel like I'm that person. like all of the stuff that had happened the previous night, I didn't feel like that was me, or I didn't want to believe that it was me. And I realised I was an alcoholic when I could have that conversation with myself and say, this turns you into somebody that, one, you don't want to be, and two, you don't really feel like you are. And I knew that happened when I drank, but I carried on drinking. So that's when, for me, the kind of penny dropped, and I went, right, I'm in a little bit too deep here. I've got no control over this anymore. Because I think it just, every negative thought that you can have, because in a day, we all have horrible thoughts, our inner monologues, like that's just a part of living. Like we do have these nasty thoughts that crop up just for a split second, and then you go, fuck up, that's stupid. When you're boozed up, there's no filter there, or like you don't know what's going to happen. Like you throw caution to the wind with it once you're in the clutches of the booze. So yeah, I agree with you. I don't think that it's a reflection of our true selves. And I mean, if it really is, all you have to do is go on a night out with a big group of people and look at all of the drinkers around you to think, God, we must all be terrible. Like some of the stuff you see when you're not drinking, it's like, what the fuck is this? It's like, in Mean Girls, when they're all like zoo animals, it's kind of like that. You look around and it's like, shit, man, these people are feral. It's scary. It's really bizarre, like, to experience that.
Do you remember things like Booze Britain on TV, like shows like that, where it was just like, so to look back on it now, like I'd watch it in my 20s and, they'd be going out to like Iron Appa and places like that. And it was, it was the sort of typical Brits abroad type stuff. But those behaviours so normalised and entrenched in our sort of society and belief of how we should be in sort of late teens and 20s be spending our summer holidays going and doing that sort of stuff. It's absolute madness when you do look at it from an outside. Is that, and there's an argument to say, is that part of growing up, in a Western society? I don't know, but a lot of the younger people now are leading the way when it comes to that idea of purposefully choosing sobriety and choosing the healthy lifestyle option.
Yeah, I think it's one of those, like, I think we kind of learn from the mistakes of generations before us, don't we? Like, I look at people that are a little bit older than me, and some of their kind of approaches to life just seem so Dickensian to me. Like some of the things that people will say. And I mean, you've got the classic like defense for racism being like, oh, it's generational. It's like, no, it's not. You people, you learn not to be like this, know. And I think that these younger generations are looking at probably things like Booze Britain and seeing people strapped to chairs in clubs with a lot of like
dentist
ladies
chairs.
that don't really, dentist chairs with people that have been completely sexualized that work in these establishments, pouring shots of whatever down the guy's throat that is then going to be really inappropriate to this poor person that works in this establishment like a few hours later. And I think people look at that and go, this isn't okay. How is this okay? And it's kind of, well, it was made to feel okay, because when you're like 12 pints deep, nothing really feels that unacceptable, does it? So it is interesting to see how younger generations are.
That education piece, I think, is so important that you sort of you highlighted there. That knowledge and education, and I think that's the difference now compared to, say, even 5 years ago, certainly 10, 15 years ago. I think the level of awareness that we now have, you don't need to look very far now to find out the sort of the true reality of the impact that alcohol has on you, whether it's from, the effect it has on sleep or blood pressure or the risks of cancer, all that kind of stuff. That information is so much more readily available now, although it's not as available and publicized as much as I think it should be. Like in the same way that, we don't like drink responsibly, I think is a really kind of humorous sort of concept, which the alcohol industry has kind of come up with, almost like a sort of their version of like whitewashing or greenwashing. It's like, oh, and just almost like that tick box at the end. It's like, oh, come and buy 6 bottles of wine and get 25% off. Do it now whilst it lasts. Come to happy hour, but make sure that you drink responsibly when you go home and don't consume it all at once. But make sure you then come back within a month and buy your shopping again from us and drink more alcohol, but make sure you drink responsibly. It's like, we don't tell people to smoke responsibly.
No.
We quite clearly put the dangers of smoking on the packets of cigarettes, and we hide them away from the eyes of young children. And that isn't happening with alcohol, and I really think it should be, because not that I don't believe in people having personal choice, but I don't want my kids growing up in a society that we did, whereby, you know, the type of behaviours that we were acting out when I was, you know, sort of in my late teens and early 20s was just so normalised. You know, I want them to be able to sort of make informed decisions, and for me, it was never an informed decision. It was just like I was one of the sheep in the pack, you know, and you know I was following what everyone else did, you know, because everyone just, you know, assumed that was the thing that you had to do on a Thursday, Friday, Saturday night to have fun. You know, and if you didn't, then what were you doing? And then obviously the next day, you know, the easiest way to take the edge off the hangover was to go and have another drink. And I think just that awareness that's raised now around the sort of the, you know, the dangers and the realities of alcohol, I think is making a big difference, especially to the younger generation.
Yeah, I think it is just informed choices, isn't it? Like, you know, I chose to smoke when I was younger, knowing that it was something that wasn't very good for me. I chose to drink, thinking that drinking excessive amounts of booze probably wasn't good for me. But, you know, your liver regenerates and all of that. And obviously the education that is appearing now is suggesting that actually no level of alcohol consumption is safe. But again, I'm not somebody that would ban alcohol. I think it's a lovely thing. If anything, I enjoyed it too much. So I don't think that we should get rid of it, but I think the education around it is something that needs to be really improved upon. Something came to my mind when you were talking about the supermarket deals. I bumped into my uncle in Morrison's the other day, and he was like, 2 big boxes of Madras, like 14 quid for one, 20 quid for two. You got to have two, haven't you? And in my brain, I was just like, don't think about it, Ben. Don't just kind of go, yeah, you do. It's like, fucking hell, man. Who like read the room, man. Like, you're bumping into me, like looking at the bloody alcohol-free stuff, being like, well, what's new here? Because I always go and just have a look. It's like taking me to a fucking aquarium, right? Just going to go and stare at the bottles. Yeah, I was just like, 14 quid for one. 20 quid for two. Fuck me. Like, we've got no chance.
That's marketing for you, isn't it? When you've got companies that have got multi-billion-dollar global marketing budgets that have a, you know, allowance and acceptance to go and market and promote something as, you know, potentially as dangerous as alcohol, as addictive as alcohol, you know, in a creative way. And it's like emotional blackmail, isn't it? Marketing. Mm-hmm. You know, it's like,
it really is.
If you know, get one for this price, and if you don't get two, you're not going to save some money. You know,
you'll be really stupid if you didn't get two. You would be so dumb not to get two. And next week was a brand new deal.
Yeah, and then sort of, you know, alcohol brands aligning themselves to celebrities, and you know, there's a particular alcohol brand which, you know, I find humorous that wraps its neutral, lowest level neutral grain spirit masquerading as vodka, and it's laced with flavorings and sugar and sugar flavorings and things like that, and E numbers, and then it's wrapped up in a gold plated bottle, and like people in marketing in alcohol sort of absolutely laud this brand because their growth is stratospheric, and people are like, it's the cleverest thing ever. It's like, what happens? So how about if I put wrapped a packet of cocaine in gold leaf and called it white gold and started sending that out? Would that be a really clever piece of marketing?
You know what though? I already want it. Like, that's just me. Like the kind of the devil up on my shoulder was like, fuck, that sounds good.
Yeah, it's hard to think no, isn't it? Yeah, that's the thing. Like, I remember Dan Riley, you know, Dapper Last, Daniel Riley.
Yeah.
He's always taken this sort of approach. He's like, you know, drugs or alcohol is a drug. Let's wrap it up all in one and say what it is. Drugs are glorious. You know, they are fundamental glorious, because if they weren't, then it's probably highly likely that people wouldn't do them quite as frequently as they do.
Yeah, people ain't going to do something that's not shit. That's
not shit. Yeah, in the moment, it makes you feel pretty good for a short period of time. You have a great time. but it's the consequences. And I think this is one of the things which I talk to people now in terms of reframing their relationship with alcohol, helping people do that. It's can you drink without consequences? If yes, great, good for you. I'm somewhat jealous. If you can't, the next question to ask is, are those consequences worth paying? And I think if they're not, then it's the time to sort of have that real honest, frank conversation with yourself and says, am I better off just leaving it? Because some of us are all or nothing people, and that middle ground doesn't exist.
Going back to Clean Break, what did the first 12 months of that look like? Obviously, you've left work, you've landed upon something that really resonates with you. You thought, right, I'm going to throw myself into this. Where do you even begin with that?
Yeah. It took me about 6 to 8 months, I think it was, to actually get the product from just literally an idea in my head to market, and I sort of did that really all by myself. I had some help, like I'm not a brewer, I kind of get the basics of brewing, but I didn't know where to start when it came to alcohol-free beer brewing, and I luckily at the time when I started, when I was sort of researching things and I was starting to look at different brands and different alcohol-free, do competitor research and things like that. I was in Leeds for a night out and I had a pint on draft of a really good alcohol-free beer. In fact, it was like the best one I tried. And it was on draft. I was like, fucking hell, that is really good. And chatting to the bartender about it. And I was like, is this your own? And it was from a brewery here in Yorkshire called Vocation Brewery. And it was like, it is ours, but it's a collaboration with another brewery who do the recipe and then we do the production of it. I was like, oh, who's that? He said, oh, it's Mash Gang. And I was like, I've never heard of them. I've never heard of this Mash Gang, who you obviously know very well. So anyway, I sort of did my research, looked it up, kind of sort of looked at what they were doing. I was like, kind of hard to sort of tell what they're doing, how they're going about this. It looks like they're just doing alcohol-free beers. They've got a couple of SKUs. Doesn't look like, I can't see that they've got a brewery or production or anything like that. I'm kind of interested to know how this is working. Anyway, I found Jordan on LinkedIn, reached out to him, sent him a message, just said what I was looking to do and said, would you have some time for a chat? Can I pick your brains? He's like, yeah, sure thing. So I jumped on a call with him, had a chat together, sort of told him what I was planning to do and the idea I've got, asked him about what he's doing, how they go about doing it. He'd done some development work for a couple of other brands in the past. And I said, well, would you be up for helping me? And he's like, I'm kind of at a stage where I don't need to do that sort of freelance stuff anymore for other brands, because ours is kind of at that point where it's about to go stratospheric, and of course it did do after that. But he said, actually, I really like the sound of what you're doing. I really buy into your idea, and yeah, let's have a chat. Let's have a look at that. And so started working on that kind of the product, the liquid, with Jordan, and really grateful for his help to kind of get that done. And he obviously pointed me in the direction of production partners and things like that. So I didn't have £500,000 down the sofa to set up my own brewery. So, went down the route of contract brewing, and then, found a local kind of brand marketeer, brand kind of development guy who was freelance. So that saved costs. So worked with him on the sort of really iterative process around creating the brand itself, the mission, the values, what it all stood for, or started to pull all that together. And then got to the point where it was May 23 when we officially launched, went to market and got the product out there. I'd sort of in the background started building sort of socials, obviously done the website, again got help from externally from that. So the things that I wasn't skilled at, I outsourced, but from a project, I was project managing it myself, the whole thing. And so that was really rewarding to go through that process. And again, this goes back to this sort of limiting belief stuff, which, previously I'd had all these limiting beliefs, whereas, I do testament to my sobriety and the clarity and focus and, belief and confidence that, willingness to experiment with things that you don't know if it's going to be right or not, testament to the journey of sobriety, really, for me. And, that I think that fear of failure fundamentally flipped to a fear of missing out on something that could be really cool, and not trying something which could be awesome. So that then launched it launched mono SKU in May 2023, and then the next 8 months, 7, 8, 9 months was a bit of a whirlwind, really. Again, everything myself. And in hindsight, one of the mistakes that I made was trying to do it all myself, and trying to do too many things, like we just talked about before this.
Yeah, I was going to say, we were talking about overstretching ourselves.
Trying to do
previously.
too much. Yeah, and layering lots of expectations on myself, false expectations, I think, believing that I could go multi-channel by myself from word go, which is a tough cookie to crack. Not investing in the right things at the right time, spending money. And it was my own investment. It was my own money that went into it in the first place. I didn't take any external investment. I didn't crowdfund it or anything like that. I had a chunk of money that we'd remortgaged the house, and I thought, this is what I'm going to put into it. And, and I felt that was enough to get it going to a place where it would be trading enough for me to take sort of a minimal amount of salary out. And, and it was everything, it was doing podcasts, it was doing trade shows, it was doing local farmers markets, it was D2C plus on trade, plus like independent retail, plus trying to start conversations with malts as well, with grocers, using some of my network for that. And it was just too much. And I was just trying to do too many things, too soon, too much too soon. And I kind of came a cropper, really. So end of 23, beginning of 24, this time last year, I was pretty burnt out. I'm not going to lie to you. Like I kept on getting styes in my eye, which was, now I can look back and realize it was a sign of stress. I was burnt out. And also at the same time, through this period as well, my running. So I've always been for 15, 16, 17 years, been a runner, done a few marathons. And then it was when I'd stopped drinking, really. And through COVID, actually, when I used my hourly hours a day exercise, when you're allowed out of your pen to go and experience the rest of the world, it was that I used that for an hour of running pretty much every day for a year and a half, whatever it was. So then layer that foundation on top of, being alcohol free, giving me that energy, that time, that focus, early mornings, and that's when my running started to really, take off a little bit in terms of, what I was able to achieve. And I got into running ultra marathons, so beyond marathons and trail running and all this kind of stuff, and found communities. But at the same time as launching the beer, I was also training for, I think I did 3 ultra marathons in the first 6 months of 2023, which was when I was creating and launching Clean Break, and then continued to train really hard. And just again, a prime example of doing too much at once, just totally burnt out, and it was almost like I was the opposite of what I'd created, this world, this universe, which was the opposite of what I'd set out to do in the first place, kind of create a more balanced lifestyle and spending, perhaps a bit more, not necessarily more time with my family, but more flexibly around, taking the kids to school and things like that. And it just wasn't happening. And I actually ended up, this time last year, in a kind of a pretty frank conversation with my coach at the time. And he said, how would it feel? Because January should have been the sort of month where Clean Break was like, yeah, this is it. This is make hay while it can. And it just didn't happen. And I had some challenges with production, because actually it's harder than most people think it is to create a decent alcohol-free beer, and kegging and filtration and things like that. I just had some real challenges, and dry January just didn't pay off for me. And so I ended up pretty much this time last year, a conversation with my coach. He said, look, how would it feel if you paused production if you stepped away from the beer for now? And at first my reaction was, well, I would feel a bit ashamed. I would feel a little bit like I'd failed. I hadn't managed to achieve what I'd set out to do, and I would feel embarrassed because someone who's got 20 years experience in the drinks industry who hasn't managed to successfully bring a drink to market in the most buoyant and fastest growing category in the drinks industry, what does that look like? So I sort of had to swallow that pride a little bit, really. And actually, when I reflected on it, the more I sort of thought about it, I said, well, actually, it would take a big weight off my shoulders, and it would give me the opportunity to have some space to think about what was next and where I could go. Because Clean Break, still, the values and the ethos and the mission and the vision with Clean Break was built not around it solely being an alcohol-free beer. Clean Break's mission is to become a global symbol for health, well-being and opportunity. So that exists whether there's an alcohol-free beer in the system or not, and it still does to this day. I'd also, in 2023, as a sort of a backup option, kind of almost hedging my bets, I guess, I'd retrained and did a 6-month diploma in coaching and positive psychology, really as self-development more than anything else. But it actually turned out to be something so much more than that, really empowering experience of self-discovery, self-development and self-discipline. And that kind of then, when this time last year, when I sort of made the decision to step away from the beer, that kind of started to come back a little bit. So the coaching, I started to do a bit of running coaching for people, free of charge. A few people reached out to me, oh, I've got a half marathon, will you help me train for it? I was like, yeah, right, let's do this. Set up a few little groups with friends, helped other people start to pick up their running, whether it's couch to 5K or half marathons or marathons. Started to really enjoy that. Had to go back to work part-time because I ran out of money. Joined Forward Leeds, which is the main alcohol and drug rehabilitation centre in Leeds, funnily enough, and went to work for them part-time. They're a charity, so money wasn't great, but very rewarding. Worked for them as an employment specialist, but then also alongside that, started to do more along the lines of the coaching stuff. And actually I was like, well, hang on a sec, like this is working. I'm able to do this. This doesn't involve me creating a product. It's me selling my time, which is, better margin. Beer was low value, low margin. So I had to sell X thousands number of units for it to be successful. And I hadn't taken on external investment. So, so I was thinking, hang on a sec, maybe this is the better route to go down. So I just reevaluated, and it was April, beginning of April last year when I joined Forward Leeds, and I sort of said to myself, right, I had to eat a bit of humble pie. I said, this is just where I'm at right now in my life. It's not forever. I'll do this. It was a year-long contract. I said, I'll do this for a year. I'll see out the contract. But at the same time, I'll get myself to a position where at the end of that contract, so April 2025, I'll be able to walk away from that job and go back full-time into Clean Break, whatever that looks like, coaching or beer, whatever it is. And then I carried on fleshing out the coaching side of things. Met my business partner halfway through last year, who I now work with on podcasts and on the coaching side of the business. And at the end of January this year, I'm really pleased to say that I was able to step away from that sort of 2 months before I'd originally intended to. And so now I'm where I found myself now. I'm full-time back in Clean Break, but really Clean Break now exists with coaching. It's all about helping other people make positive progress in their life. And the beer is on pause. People are like, oh, yeah, what happened to the beer? It's like, well, it's just on pause. It's just shelved for now, that I can flick a switch and turn it back on whenever I want. I've got the contacts, I've got the know-how, I've got all the process, I've got the fundamentals of it. And I will go back to it at some point, but it needs to be when the timing's right. And right now, the timing's not right, because I'm getting huge reward and satisfaction out of coaching. And it's just it's a more viable income option as well at the moment. And I think actually what we're doing is, between me and Andy now, we're creating the Clean Break community, which is essentially building a community of like-minded people who want to make positive progress in their lives, want to work on the 3 pillars of Clean Break and what Clean Break stands for, which is mindset, movement, and lifestyle. How can we help people do that? Reframe negative thought patterns, remove limiting beliefs, help people create a sustainable and consistent movement routine in their week. And then also lifestyle, help people reframe their relationship with alcohol, whatever that looks like, if it's a short-term, long-term tactical break, whatever that is, and use my experience to do that. And Andy and I are, my business partner, we're very similar journeys. So we really get on really well. We're both just regular guys who have found the ability to run long distances and get huge satisfaction out of doing that. And and then I think if we can create the community around what we're doing now, and probably in hindsight, what I look back and realize I probably should have done with the beer in the first instance, is create this idea of 1,000 loyal followers. You get 1,000 loyal fans, and then launch a product, and say, well, look, creating an alcohol-free beer brand under the Clean Break brand. We're going to crowdfund it. You've all got first dibs at investing in that. And let's say each of those 1,000 people agree to invest 100 quid. That's £100,000 before you even launch of crowdfunded equity that comes in and gives you the basis to be able to hopefully succeed at doing it. So that's the sort of intention. That's the kind of roadmap really, of what 2025 looks like. And at some point, the beer will come back.
It's interesting, isn't it, when you start something and you think, oh, it's going to look like this, and you get so set in that's what this is going to be, and you kind of ignore the not necessarily the obvious thing, but you'll ignore what the signs are suggesting. It's like, go into this. So in terms of like the coaching and all of that side of things, it seems like that is where your kind of passion for it lay. Because after all, that was why you stepped away from the hospitality industry to do something that felt rewarding and that kind of aligned with your beliefs. So I think, like, I've looked into doing a beer release, and 5 minutes of research was enough for me to go, fuck no. Like, that is so much more than if, because all you see is like, oh, booming market.
Yeah.
But like, it is a booming market, but so many people have already got eggs in baskets. Like, you know, it's still fucking difficult to break. So to have got, to have got to the point to actually have a product available, which I know was a bloody good beer. I didn't know Jordan had been involved. He's been involved with pretty much fucking everything, so it doesn't surprise me. But yeah, it's a wild scene out there. So, you know, if and when it does come back, you know, people will be ready for it. But it's just really great that you've actually gone, no, I'm going to put my energy into this.
Yeah.
That's more rewarding, both financially and kind of mentally for yourself. I think that's a really positive thing. And if anything, that sums up what Clean Break is all about, right? It's actually, let's take a little bit of a hit on this, be that a bit of a hit to the ego or whatever you want to call it. But let's reevaluate and put our energies into this thing that's actually still really positive and really great. Like, you've summed up the brand just by doing that, really.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. Yeah, and I think that's been one of the most rewarding things about the journey is you know, being able to sort of reframe what I've done and see it as, you know, when we have goals and objectives, we are essentially either successful or unsuccessful at achieving them. And I think moving away from this kind of idea of failure and labeling things as failure, it's like you only fail if you stop trying, you know. And I haven't stopped trying. I just wasn't successful at doing the thing that I set out to do in the first instance. But being able to adapt and pivot your goals and objectives to still move forward into growth, I think is really important as a founder, as an entrepreneur. You've got to have this willingness to accept when something hasn't been successful. No, hold on to it for so long that it's going to completely drain you and will end up leading to failure, but accept that and then pivot and you know, rethink, take a bit of time out, step away from it and just think, right, gee, how can we continue to move this forward? And that's been a really, you know, really important part of the process and something that I've learned in that journey. And yeah, you're absolutely right. It does, what I'm doing now, it very, very much aligns with the values of Clean Break. And yeah, you're right. It is that as buoyant as the alcohol-free market is, and as much as, you know, the growth is definitely there, it is from a low base, let's be honest. And you know, the reality of it is, yes, there will be some people who do what I've done and will succeed. But I think the reality of it is that there are really well capitalized brands out there that started early doors that have got a large chunk of distribution and existing volume and brand equity and volume share, who ultimately, the reality is, I don't think any of them are really making any profit, any money. They've just got a lot of investment and they're just able to put that investment into growing volume, because ultimately what they want to do is they want to flip the brand and they want to sell it. You know, that's what the shareholder value is. You know, people haven't, you know, the venture capitalists and the investors haven't invested in those brands to not see a return on their investment. And the return on their investment is realised when a major brewer comes in and says, oh, great, yeah, we'll buy that brand. You know, just in the same way that, like, you know, a Diageo did with Casamigos, for example, or, you know, whoever it is, you know, any startup brand, ultimately in the drinks industry, they're looking to grow the brand and hopefully get it to a place where a bigger company will buy it, and that's fine. That's just a good, sound business model to have. But I think the alcohol-free space is quite condensed at the moment. I don't want to say it's saturated. Definitely not saturated. It's not over spilling out the edges, but I think there's increasingly every brewery now that makes alcoholic beer recognizes the importance and the value of the alcohol-free category in their own brand identity and continued growth. So they're all doing it. They have the advantage of having production in-house, whereas a lot of the independent alcohol-free producers haven't, like myself, didn't have the capital to be able to set up their own brewery. Yes, there's a few of them, the likes of Jump Ship and Drop Bear and those kind of guys who, will continue, Nirvana, who will continue to do great things and have that flexibility to be able to brew their own beer. But the vast majority of people doing it are contract brewing, and getting production done externally, and that comes with an additional tranche of margin that you have to offset to that production team. And the complexities, people don't appreciate the complexities. People always say like some of these alcohol-free beers are great these days, but they're so bloody expensive. It's like, well, yeah, just stop putting the value solely on the alcohol. Yes, alcohol has tax aligned to it, but alcohol is a natural preservative. So the minute you remove the alcohol, you leave the liquid open to, spoilage. So to protect the integrity of the liquid, you've got to do other things to that liquid, which the alcohol producers don't have to do. So whether that's sterile filtration or whether it's pasteurization, those processes take additional time and effort and money, and also when without the alcohol carries not a bit of flavor, but predominantly it's mouthfeel, as I think that alcohol carries, which, not so much for beer, but certainly for wines and spirits, you have to find a way of replicating that mouthfeel for it to be an experience that people kind of almost, have the perception of that experience that alcohol gives them. And so like things like Bativo do that really well.
Yes.
It's got that amazing mouthfeel to it. And there's a few other spirit alternatives on the market that do it really well. But then you take a bottle of any blue label brands, analog alcohol-free variation of their best-selling gin, Gordon's, Tanqueray, whatever it might be, it is a very watery, similarly flavoured version of the gin, and it's not a particularly great experience. It always feels a bit underwhelming. Whereas you get a can of Mash Gang or a can of We Can Be Friends or, any other really good quality alcohol-free beer, you feel like you're having a beer.
Yeah. Yeah, completely.
Your experience isn't at all hindered by the lack of the alcohol. If it is, or your perception of your experience is, then that's probably a good sign that you may have a problem with alcohol. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So there's a lot of things that happens in the production process, and then for me personally, it was everything. I was production, I was logistics, I was finance, I was marketing, I was sales, I was everything. It was just so hard to try and spin all those plates at once.
Yeah, it's a big bloody task. But I'm glad that you found a good kind of place with where you want to take things. It sounds like you've got a very exciting year ahead of you, and I really can't wait to see what comes up for you, because it's been, as you say, it's been a lot of years in the making, this. So it's a very exciting time. Thank you very much, Rich, for coming to talk to me today. As I say, I'm really looking forward to seeing where Clean Break goes going forward, and I know I'll be keeping a keen eye on it in case that beer ever does come back.
You'll be the first, one of the first for you to have those early day samples, Ben. Don't you worry about that.
Can I just say, first and foremost, what an exceptional human being that man is. It was a pleasure to have Rich on this week's episode of the Sober Boozers Club podcast. My name is Ben Gibbs. You can find me on all the socials at Sober Boozers Club. If you like what they're doing over at Clean Break, if it sounds good to you, check them out on Instagram. It's take.a.cleanbreak, one word. For now, you take care.